Thank you so much for giving me your time today, Richard. I've spoken to so many people about you, and they finally get a chance to see who I'm actually talking about now. So, like I
You're
said, this is
welcome.
going to be a really, really cool conversation. And yeah, I don't even know where to start. So, your career has been quite expansive,
Uh-huh.
hasn't it? I don't. Yeah. So, have you been a psychologist? Is it for 30 years?
Yeah, I've been at it a
45
long
years,
time.
right? Uh, and you're an author.
For 45 years.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
But this is why you have so much to
I,
give,
I
right?
was a
Because
mere
you have
I was a mere
email,
child when I started,
you've got
Jonny.
the t-shirt on all of this stuff, haven't you?
Yeah.
And one of the best things you did for me was keep me on the straight and narrow with my own spiritual journey, because I
Ah,
feel
well,
there's so much BS out there with psychology, isn't there? And because it's such subjective
mm,
matter, it's very hard to stay objective. And that's why I feel it's so important to have somebody like yourself to help guide us along that path. So, one of my first questions is,
yeah.
if somebody was watching this video and they wanted to start, or they were just curious about starting, like their spiritual journey or meditation practice, what would you say are the best things to avoid? Because I know there can be so many pitfalls.
Mm. So the best things to avoid, I think, are the kind of faddish, new age meditation techniques. Now, I believe in the old tried and true meditation schools like Vipassana or Zen or those that have been around for thousands of years. I think those, and there's lots of literature about how to engage those practices. You don't even really need a teacher if you don't have one. You can do it through a good book. But I recommend you use the tried and true methods. And then I
Wow, yeah,
recommend that you do the very thing that's most difficult to do, and that is not judge yourself. Um, right? Because when we're sitting, especially early on in meditation, we're constantly going, "Are we doing it right? Am I? What should I be thinking about? What should I not be thinking about?" We just constantly judge what we're doing rather than just sitting there, focusing on the breath,
that
relaxing the
that's
body,
some
and
great
letting the
insights right there.
process
And I
do
feel
itself through
whenever I've
us,
looked at like
basically.
new age things, I did fall into a few of those along my journey, whatever we like to call it. And they always take me back to the older teachings.
Mm-hmm.
It's just someone's tried to like reinvent the wheel, if you will, but it never works quite as well as the foundational ones that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true. I think
Yeah.
they try to put it in modern
So
language and make it more
when you
accessible, but I
started
think
meditating,
something's often lost
like,
in the
did you do it
translation.
as a solo venture or did you find a group of people or how did that work for you? Right.
Well, I started out as a solo venture, reading material on it that I thought would be helpful to me that had been recommended, and then practicing on my own. And then only after maybe 2 or 3 years of individual practice did I start seeking out groups that I could sit with. And by that time, I'd started my own spiritual center. So then we would
Yeah. See,
meditate together
I
and we would go
remember
on
like
retreats together and that
doing
kind
it
of thing.
solo
But I
for a very
started
long
out
time, and
solo.
I'd
Absolutely.
known you. I'd been connected with you for 10 years before I ever paid attention to what you were saying. Did you feel like you had anybody in your life similar who had kind of been an amazing signpost? You just hadn't learned to read it
Ah,
yet. Did you have any occurrences like that?
not really, Johnny. In fact, I had grown up in the traditional religion, Christianity, in the traditional church, and I had started teaching adult classes in various comparative religions and so on. And eventually, even though I was in a fairly liberal church, they asked me to leave because they didn't like what they were hearing from me. So at that point, I had no group to turn to. And interestingly enough, in fact, many of the people
Wow.
who were attending my classes at that church said, if you'll start teaching this in your home, we'll come attend. And so that's what I started doing. I started teaching it in our home, and these folks started coming.
That's
And then
incredible
over
because
a number of
I
years,
can
it grew
only
into a
speak for
spiritual
myself
center
about
called the Center
how
for
incredibly
Contemplative
lonesome that
Living.
journey is when you embark upon it. But
Yeah,
back then, when you were in a situation like that, and there wasn't as many people talking about it now, and if they were, they didn't share it on the internet, right? So it must have been twice as I, without going into duality and all that kind of thing. Like it must have
right.
felt like a very isolating experience for you at that time in ways, did it? Because
It was. It was, and for a number of reasons. Number one was because I was new to this whole area, and so I didn't know a lot about it. I didn't know where to go seek support, really. Um,
yeah,
and then my first wife, the woman I was married to at that time, she was very traditional in her Christianity, and so this stuff scared her to death. So it wasn't even like I could talk to her about it.
yeah,
And I think if that group of people hadn't come to me and
yeah.
basically said,
I can
please
only
teach
imagine
us more
because back
about
then
this,
it's like as well.
I would have been
It's
hard
a given
pressed
that
to
people
find
were
support.
much more set in their ways and perhaps closed-minded back then, right? I feel even now speaking up about it when we have this age of information overload and open-mindedness, if you will,
Yeah,
whatever we like to call it. Things are so much more accessible. And even now, speaking about it, most people think I'm crazy, right? So I can only imagine what it was like back then when things were so much more like limited or filtered, or you had
yeah,
to be a certain
right.
way to fit in. Yeah. So I find it incredible that you were able to do that. You know, it's
Hmm.
amazing. And what it must have done for those people as well, you know, for them to
Yeah,
hear through the church that, oh, hold on a second, there's actually a better way here. That's some powerful stuff. It really is. So,
right.
no, you go ahead. You have
Yeah,
so much more to add
exactly,
to this.
exactly. I Go ahead. I was about to tell a story about when I was doing that teaching in the church. Um, and I was having, it was a society church. So there were doctors and lawyers and judges and all kinds of that coming to my classes. And my oldest son at the time, who was about 13, he started coming to my adult class because he was bored with his own class, the class for his age group. So he would sit in the back of the room and listen to dad talk. And one day I was doing a lecture on reincarnation, on karma and reincarnation. And I looked at the audience of these very educated people. I said, so there's good news and there's bad news about reincarnation. The bad news is it could take you 10,000 lifetimes to become enlightened. What is
Yeah.
the good news? And dead silence, right? Nobody was going to say a word. And so I asked again, and I said, what is the good news about reincarnation? My son is in the back of
Yeah.
the room waving his arm like this. Well, I wasn't going to call on him. He was 13 years old. What the hell did he know, right? So I asked one more time, what is the good news about reincarnation? Still dead silence. Finally, I called on my son, Chad. I said, Chad, okay, what's the good
Wow,
news?
that's
He goes, Dad, the
that,
good
that
news
there's there's
is
there's actually
sooner
quite
or
a lot of lessons
later,
I can take from that.
everybody makes it.
It just goes to show. Yeah, I was literally just
I
about
know.
to say it's like
And so
it's
people
so
came up
easy
to
to
me
not
afterwards
give
and said,
people a
could he
chance,
teach
isn't
the
it?
class
And
next week?
oftentimes when you do, we can be pleasantly surprised. And when it comes from someone so like young and
Yeah.
unadulterated by the world around them, they just have a much
Yeah.
purer way of delivering messages, don't they? Like like right then,
Yeah.
it's incredible. And I find the more I
Right.
return
Innocent. Yeah.
to or whatever, the more I remind
Absolutely.
myself of consciousness
Absolutely.
as being my true state. You know, whatever that is, it really does become more simplistic and purified and childlike in its
Hmm.
explanation. It really does, yeah. So in many ways, it's almost like
Yeah.
I you could put this in better words than I can, but it
Yeah.
definitely feels like a rebirth when we awaken. Not like a new life because it's completely different to that, but how would you explain awakening to someone
Hmm.
who's completely open to it but has zero experience with it.
So,
Yeah.
first of all, you kind of have to judge where they are in their own journey. Because I'm a psychologist, I think about
Yeah.
this in psychological terms. And so I think about the different stages of the expansion of consciousness. Okay. So I always try to get a read on where I think they might be in that expansion process. And then I try to address that level, and then move them forward from there. But let's say they're at the level of, well, it's actually about the third level of
Yeah.
consciousness expansion by most developmental theorists, where they have group consciousness, where they have identified with a group, whether that be
Yeah.
a religion or a sports team or a
Okay.
Democratic or Republican Party, whatever it might be, that their identity, their ego is identified with a group. Well, the
Okay.
next stage for them is
Yeah.
to begin to open up that identity to identify
Yeah.
with
Makes
all
sense.
human beings, regardless of group. Okay. And so I would start pointing at that for them. And okay. And so I would start talking about the oneness that we have with one another, that we are all derived from the same energy, the same, I like to call it love, but we're all derived, or we are all expressions of that same, whatever that is. And I would start pointing towards that. Now, if they were already at that level, then I'd start talking about awakening at the next level, which is to see that not just all other human beings, but all other animals, all other created order is one with us, and beginning to incorporate that into our understanding of wholeness. And then finally, the last stage of development for folks in this process is to realize that yourself has expanded so
Yeah.
far,
Wow.
that it
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
grown so
It's
much that essentially it just fades away,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. I.
And so
you. Yeah.
what you're
You put
left
things very
with is
succinctly.
all of
You
it.
really do. So it's hard to add on to those things, but you know how much you've impacted my life, and yeah, even though the
Thank
life
you.
of me now no longer really exists, without getting too technical, you know what I mean. But that's we'll save that for later. So then, what would you do?
Hmm.
How would you
Right,
help advise somebody who, let's say,
right,
they have
right.
embarked upon these things you've spoken about just now, but everybody around them isn't open to it, even when they are? Like, how would you help? Like, the first thing I say to people is, find professional help, like from somebody like
Hmm.
yourself. Um, if you're finding real struggle, because what I did was the first few years by myself, and then
Hmm.
it got to a certain stage. I was like, yeah, I can't do this. I need help, and so I found it. But if somebody's not in a position where they can maybe get help from somebody like you, how would you advise they navigate through everyone else kind of rejecting their new ideology, their new practices, if you will? Yeah.
Wow. That's different for every person, but it's the one thing that's true for everyone is it's painful because, and I certainly went through this in my journey, which is you lose a lot of people. Um, I lost most of my family. I lost most of my friends because they thought that I just lost my mind. And so
Yeah.
again, I think one of the things you need to do is to, if you cannot find a good integral psychotherapist, and I emphasize the word integral, meaning that they're trained in spirituality as well as psychology, that if you can't find a good integral psychotherapist, then the next best thing is to get online and look for a group of people who have some awareness of spirituality that you're interested in. And
This is
that's
why
the
I'm so
advantage of
grateful
the
and
online
lucky to have
community
came
these
across
days
you,
is there's a
because
lot
I did
available
it.
now that
It was
wasn't
slightly reverse
available
to
when
how
I
you
was
just
going through
mentioned there.
this.
I did it by myself, or whatever we like to call that, and then
Mm-hmm.
I found this new age crowd, and then I started to click and was like, hold on, this shit's not for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then your words started to make more sense to me. So I kind of needed that, I needed to go that way to be pushed back your way. Yeah. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, it's but like you mentioned about that
Kind
loneliness
of
and
a
everything, you know,
bridge.
it's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you I felt personally like I've as the human experience goes, you lose everything, like literally everything. You give up ownership of everything, but so much that you maybe wouldn't want to
Hmm.
give up when you're in the sense of self, right? It's yeah,
And it starts out small. It starts out with losing a few friends or maybe a few family members. And so you can sort of be inoculated to it a little bit at a time. But sometimes it happens all at once. And all of a sudden you find yourself standing alone. And that's really frightening. But not only is it frightening to realize you're
yes,
standing alone, but
yeah,
eventually, when you realize you're standing not as a self, but as all of it, that can be very disconcerting. And if you don't have somebody in your life who has been through that or can help you navigate that, it can be very scary. And I've seen people have come to me who have gone through that who are incredibly depressed because they don't know where to turn or
yeah,
what this
and
means
like
or how to
that
decipher
literally
it,
happened with my first awakening
because
when I
there's
was
just not
19.
much in terms of
I
support
had
available
no
out there.
clue what was going on. I just woke up one day and I'd been putting myself through absolute hell. And I just woke up one day and was like, why do I feel okay? And I was like, I'm going to start. And I'm lucky that I went from like major depression and all this kind of thing. It wasn't major
Yeah,
depressive.
yeah,
So I just wrong use of words there. I was seriously depressed, anxiety, post traumatic stress disorder, all these things. And for me, after going through all of that, the awakening wasn't
yeah,
a choice.
yeah.
I just woke up and everything all of a sudden was easy. But I still felt like I'd lost my mind in a way because I couldn't understand how everything could shift so quickly overnight. And I could
Hmm.
just then look in the mirror, have all this clarity, and be like, well, I don't need any of those things anymore, but it's completely effortless. And I'm just going to start being healthy. And I did. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
and some people, you've had a series of
yeah,
those kinds
yeah,
of awakenings. For some people, it's more gradual. It just kind of, I like to
right,
say, it sneaks up on you when you're not looking. In your case, it was
right,
much more defined, and that's
right.
actually
Okay.
more the
Because
exception
I
than it is
feel
the rule.
it
I
became
think
more
for
of a
many
gradual thing
people
when
in
I
the
started
awakening
working with
process,
you.
it's more gradual.
Which I definitely don't think is a. I think there's a few reasons for that, but I definitely prefer it that way.
Mm.
it's yeah, you know, it's but yeah, I feel just because you probably
Hmm.
kept me on the
Yeah,
straight and
right,
narrow, and also I had more
right.
experience to navigate what I'd already been through, so kind of knew what to
Hmm.
recognize, etc., and everything. But like, um, yeah, it's I
Right,
definitely not
right.
going into my story here. So my next question would be, um, when you're dealing with, uh, we asked about dealing with people who are maybe starting their journey, the lonely feelings, like the things slipping away. How, as a psychotherapist, a psychologist, um, do you perhaps
Yeah.
deal with somebody who you, or maybe a better way of asking it is there certain people who you know will never awaken, but you still help them? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I would think if I've never done the numbers on this, but certainly the majority of people I work with on a daily basis or a weekly basis are probably
I
never
think you've
going
got
to
that
awaken
slightly
to the
more.
level that we're talking about here. Will they have little improvements? Will they grow up, so to speak?
I think
Yeah,
I've
will they have
lost.
little
I
improvements
think it's
or
cut out slightly
become more
there. I do
mature or more
apologize, Richard,
tolerant?
because I know you're
Yes,
dropping absolute
that's
wisdom
quite
here.
possible.
Hopefully, it's going to
Can you hear me?
come back in a second. Um,
Yeah, there
okay,
you
we're
are.
back. I can, yes.
Yeah, there you go. Can you hear me? Okay, so I was saying that
Right.
for the majority of people that I work with, it's much more. a process not necessarily of awakening, but of growing up, okay, of maturity. And I would say that that's the majority of the folks that I work with in my practice. There are always a few who I consider to be or can tell are
I
ready
don't
for
laugh
a
at the
deeper
circumstances
understanding.
there, but just when
And
you
then
said
I
off the
work
back
with
of
them
that,
in that way.
that there's certain things you can tell. There's been many times on in my working with you where you've dropped these incredible insights.
Mm-hmm.
They've been the shortest little phrases, but they've been the most bubble bursting things you could ever say to me. And there've been such incredible shifts forward. Some of them I have really disliked at the time, but then
Yeah.
others that have been really healing instantly. But they always serve the greater purpose of deepening my experience in consciousness every time. I remember the first
Mm-hmm.
conversation I ever had with you through the teletherapy, and I'd gone through a pretty rough breakup at the time. And you said one sentence to me at the end of that that completely allowed me to put the whole situation to rest without going into obviously what it is. And I was just like, it was just a perspective that
Mm-hmm.
completely shattered every thing my
Mm-hmm.
sense of self was trying to make of it. Uh,
Well,
yeah,
thank you for saying that, and I'm grateful that I could be of help in that way. But let me just say this, Jonny. When I sit down with someone and am working with them, I haven't got a clue what I'm going
yeah,
to say. I haven't got a
yeah,
clue where it's going to go. And even after the fact, they may not remember what I said. Um, one of my self-created mantras
the
over the
flow state,
years,
right?
when I would go from one session to the next, would be not from me, but
Yeah.
through me.
And
So that,
I don't
yeah,
want to
to
keep too much
stay
more of
out
your
of my
time.
own
I just
way
have
and
one more
just
thing I
let
wanted to
whatever's
say. I
going to happen
remember
happen.
you completely burst my bubble in
Yeah.
one sentence once, and you were like, I, I, I was going through a particular
Mm.
awakening transition over a few months, and I posted on my Facebook. I was like, I feel so loving and warm and connected and attached to everything. And you just popped up and were like,
Hmm.
don't worry, it won't last. And I was you seriously at that time because because I wasn't because I wasn't aware of this thing. You just burst this bubble and it really pissed my sense of self off. And I was like, I spent 2 or 3 days going, why would he not want this? Da-da-da-da-da. And then obviously I meditated on it and it all made
Yeah.
sense,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. One of the just I know we're running short on time, but real quickly, I know that probably one of the greatest
yeah,
myths about
wow.
enlightenment or awakening is
No, it's not.
that you're going to live in a state of constant bliss the rest of your life,
Yeah.
and that's just not true. It's just not true. You're going to continue to be a fallible human being, and heir to all of the things that
It's
fallible
so
human
true, isn't it?
beings
It's like the
experience.
ugliest but most
So if you're looking
beautiful
for
thing
constant
anyone could
bliss,
ever
go look
experience,
somewhere else
I
because you
believe.
ain't going to
It's
find it
so
here.
dark, but it's so light, but it's both equally, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy shit. And you've heard me talk about that darkness enough,
Yes,
haven't you?
exactly. And sometimes you
Richard,
don't see
thank you
the
so
light
much. I
until
would love
you've
to do this
waded
again
through
with
the
you
dark.
if possible sometime. You are
Hmm.
such a
I have.
example of what humans should be. Thank you for today. And
Yeah.
I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Thank you. Take care.
Well, thank you for saying that.